stick at one thing for years and years and years. It's not my vibe, I don't think.
Really?
Yeah.
So you do it by choice? Because there are a lot of people who they will have 3 jobs, but really, essentially, it's akin to one income. So it's born out of necessity, isn't it?
I think, we're talking about 2 different groups of people, and this is choice, because we could all get a full-time job and it might be a bit boring for us and things like that. But, there are actually people who have to do this to pay the rent. And so they're going from, one 8-hour shift to another 6-hour shift somewhere else. And, it's tough, just to put clothes on their kids' backs and food on the table, and sometimes they're swapping with partners, so someone's home with the kids and things like that. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about very greyling.
Right. So it's a different level.
Very greyling, and we're doing this because Eli and I are probably more creative, and we get bored doing one thing for too long.
It's a very different scenario.
And also the other thing is that we just roll in and we roll with the punches. Like, I've been made redundant in broadcasting like 3 times, and I didn't get redundant from the last one, but I left, but I was kind of pushed, but you know what I mean. So you just have to kind of recreate yourself and find somewhere else, and you'll know that in this industry too.
Oh yeah, my first job, made redundant within 6 months, so it's a good feeling.
But it teaches you.
It does teach you.
You have to get up on your horse again and go again, and you have to think of new things, and we're doing this all the time here at RNZ, that you're doing it because it's not the standard kind of journalism anymore from 5 years ago. You've been expected to do multi-platform, multimedia kind of things, and everyone just has to evolve. You have to learn new things, otherwise the world passes you by.
Yes. Are you a bit concerned by it? I mean, the stats are going up. 7%. It's quite a lot of people working 2 or more jobs.
How many is it?
7%. 7% of the workforce, and that's rising quite fast.
See, I'm only concerned if they're people that can't afford to eat.
Yeah.
And other than that, I think that I'm not concerned for Eli.
Yes,
or me.
I am concerned for you, Eli. I'm very concerned about your welfare.
I'd be concerned about who those 7% are and who they represent, because if they're not earning enough, and we don't have, if they're earning $17.80 an hour, like minimum wage, that is a problem when you're paying house prices in Auckland. And
is there still a secondary tax as well?
Probably not at that rate.
Yeah.
Not at that end of the scale, but obviously for you on your $180,000 job, first and a secondary job.
Well done, Leon.
Yeah, how did you know? No, but that is a secondary tax. As far as I'm aware, that's still a thing if you have a full-time job and then you take on a part-time.
I think you have to be over a certain. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, but I'm sure you have to be over it. Like if you're earning $21,000 at one job and then another $6,000 somewhere else, I'm not sure you're paying secondary tax because you're still under.
I think, when I was a teenager, I was doing 2 different part-time jobs. I had to do secondary tax on the second.
Okay, maybe it's true.
But then there are people like Eli who are in that sort of bracket and are subject to what they call the gig economy. So there'll be some that ask, what is a career? Where is my career going when I've got sort of 3 jobs? What's the out?
It's up to us though, because we're in charge of it, because we've got our 3 jobs each. We go, which one do I like the most? Is that
the old personal responsibility? Is that what it is?
I think it is when you're making these decisions at this end.
Yeah, all right. Hey, you've been fantastic, both of you. Some big topics this afternoon, and you traversed them very well. Mihi Forbes and Eli Matthews, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And I want to strap him back with you at 3:45 tomorrow. Checkpoint is up next. See you.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei. It takes a super typhoon to stop the All Blacks in their tracks. Saturday's game is off, but the ball's still up in the air when it comes to the do-or-die match of Scotland versus Japan. We go live to Tokyo for the latest. Spark adds broadcast rights for cricket to its trophy cabinet. What does that mean for fans with a hamster in their internet wheel? We talk to a former student who abandoned his room at the Sonoda Student Hostel, and no one noticed. Has the fitness bar been lowered for wannabe police recruits after one of the entry tests is ditched? And Shane Jones considers reining in forestry conversions after a rural backlash.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. World Rugby is cancelling the All Blacks' next match against Italy at the Rugby World Cup on Saturday as Typhoon Hagibis bears down on Japan. The super typhoon is forecast to sweep through the Tokyo, Yokohama and Toyota areas. The All Blacks' final pool game was due to be played in Toyota City at a venue likely to be severely impacted by the storm. Alan Gilpin, the head of the Rugby World Cup, says the decision's been made with public safety in mind.
As a result of the detailed independent advice from the weather advisors and given the scheduled public transport closures, we've taken the very difficult but we think right decision to cancel certain matches in the affected areas.
Alan Gilpin urged rugby fans in Japan to stay indoors, not to travel and monitor the news for information. The cancellation of the game means the All Blacks have now come top in their pool and Italy has been eliminated from the tournament. The journalist Nikki Hager's lawyer says there's nothing to stop security agencies from unlawfully obtaining phone logs again. The Defence Force asked the SIS to help its investigation into claims made in Hager's 2011 book about the New Zealand military and intelligence activity in the Middle East. The Acting Inspector General of Intelligence and Security says the SIS unlawfully got Hager's phone records as well as those of a Defence Force officer suspected of being his source. Lawyer Felix Geiringer says an SIS apology to Hager isn't enough and action is needed to prevent it happening again.
There has to be a consequence of some kind that really means something and can give the public confidence that they're not just going to do it again tomorrow, or in fact that they haven't been doing it constantly for the last 8 years as well.
Nikki Hager's lawyer, Felix Geiringer. The National Party says a second Treasury gaffe regarding confidential information shows a lack of leadership from the Finance Minister. Treasury has admitted mistakenly publishing a section of the government's financial statements almost a week early. It says the data was on its website for about an hour, but was removed before anyone saw the figures. It's the second lapse following a storm earlier this year when Treasury allowed fragments of the budget documents to be accessed by the opposition. National MP Todd McClay says it's ineptitude.
It seems that they've learnt nothing at all. I tell you one thing, though, it's very clear that Grant Robertson and the government are very focused on counting people's taxes, much less on protecting their privacy. After 2 years, this is just not good enough.
Todd McClay. A former nurse at Palmerston North Hospital says she resigned because of poor facilities and under-resourcing. She's being backed by the nurses' organisation, which says the situation at the hospital is pushing staff to breaking point. It comes after 80 senior doctors wrote to the Mid-Central District Health Board about the inadequate state of the hospital. The nurse in question, who RNZ has agreed not to name, says she dreaded going to work because of the stress.
You might only have 5 or 6 patients, but they could be really high demand patients. You get given a list, the start of your shift, and you realise that you're at 30 hours over your 8-hour shift, and you don't have the hours in your shift to provide the level of care required.
The nurse says she felt like she had no choice but to resign earlier this year. A new batch of MMR vaccine has arrived in New Zealand and has been passed for distribution to DHBs around the country. Health officials are optimistic the worst measles outbreak in 20 years has peaked, although they can't say for sure yet. Dr Karen Bartholomew, the Director of Health Outcomes for the Waitemata and Auckland DHBs, says the new stock of vaccine has been through a quality assurance process.
Our priorities do remain the same, so that's vaccinating our 12-month-old and 4-year-olds and also those aged under 30. So those priorities do remain the same as we do that planning. But the additional vaccine does allow us to start vaccinating more people in those priority groups.
Dr Karen Bartholomew. Nationwide, the total number of cases is almost 1,700, with the vast majority in the Auckland region. The chief censor has classified a live stream of the shooting attacks in Germany overnight as objectionable. In the video, the gunman is reported to have made anti-Semitic remarks, calling himself a Holocaust denier. The attacks on a synagogue and a kebab shop left 2 people dead and at least 2 others injured. The chief censor, David Shanks, says it is illegal for anyone in this country to view, possess or distribute the material in any form, including on social media. He says the 35-minute stream depicts and promotes extreme violence and terrorism. It's 5 minutes past 5. The All Blacks will go almost 2 weeks without a match at the Rugby World Cup following the decision by tournament organisers to cancel matches this weekend. As we just heard in the news, the All Blacks game against Italy in Toyota City has been cancelled because of the threat of Typhoon Hagibis. The All Blacks' last match was their win over Namibia on Sunday, and now they won't be playing again until their quarter-final in Tokyo on Saturday week. Sports editor Stephen Hewson has more.
England's match against France has also been cancelled, but both teams are already assured of a quarter-finals berth. However, Japan's game against Scotland is still due to go ahead. It's that match which has the biggest impact on just who the All Blacks will play in the quarter-finals. If Japan win or draw that game against Scotland, they'll finish top of their pool, leaving Ireland second, assuming they beat Samoa. And then Ireland would face the All Blacks in next Saturday's quarter-finals. Other quarter-finals would then shape as Japan against South Africa, England against Australia and Wales against France. This is Stephen Hewson.
The Silver Ferns captain Laura Langman will play on in 2020. The veteran mid-quarter has re-signed with the Sunshine Coast Lightning for next year's Super Netball competition in Australia, ending doubt about her playing future. It appeared the 33-year-old Langman was considering retirement, with time running out for her to commit to an Australian franchise. But the Lightning have confirmed their captain is returning to the Sunshine Coast next year, even though coach Nolene Dorua is moving on. It remains to be seen whether Langman will continue with the Silver Ferns throughout 2020. That's the news.
Turkey invades Syria.
The first indications we had were a lot of airstrikes in and around Ras Al Ain and the town of Tal Abayad.
A synagogue under attack.
The immediate priority for the German authorities is to seal this one off, as it were, and make sure nobody else is at large with weapons.
More hatred online.
They've weaponised an entertainment platform and made it into a tool for terror and for spreading of terror.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6 a.m. on 101 FM, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, vertical structures for people to get themselves out of the way of a tsunami are being considered for use in Hawke's Bay. And after 10, Nguyen siblings and Wellington GPs, Elvin, Alan and Adrienne Misikulina, celebrate Pacific success in the health sciences. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Scattered rain becoming persistent and heavier from the west this evening. Rain turning to a few showers tomorrow morning or afternoon, but mainly fine from Taranaki southwards. Possible thunderstorms tomorrow morning in Northland. Gisborne to Wairirapa, high clouds, scattered rain spreading north tonight and tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, rain clearing before dawn tomorrow morning. Isolated showers developing tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain and heavy falls. Canterbury, cloudy periods and a few showers. Otago and Southland, occasional rain, more persistent from tonight. Snow lowering to 500 metres in Southland and 800 metres in Otago later tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine, low cloud or fog developing tonight, a period of rain tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's begin tonight in Japan, where Super Typhoon Hagibis has officially taken out the All Blacks. In the past hour, World Rugby has made an unprecedented decision to cancel 2 Rugby World Cup pool matches as Tokyo braces for the typhoon on Saturday. The All Blacks' final World Cup pool match against Italy in the city of Toyota, about 300 kilometres from Tokyo, is officially off. France's final pool game against England has also been cancelled. Now, the cancellations mean the 4 teams will get 2 points each and both games will be considered a draw. Rugby World Cup boss Alan Gilpin told media while the decision was difficult, the safety of players and fans is paramount, as the typhoon is expected to also cause mass disruption to public transport. He said relocating the games was not an option.
The Pool B match between New Zealand and Italy in the city of Toyota will be cancelled. The Pool C match between England and France at Yokohama Stadium will be cancelled. As you can imagine, the decision to cancel these matches has not been taken lightly and has been made with the best interests of team, public, tournament and volunteer safety as a priority, based on the expert advice and the detailed information we have available. We've been intensively working through a range of detailed contingency options in partnership with the host cities, the venues and the teams to try and ensure that any impacted matches had a fair chance of being played. However, the risks are just too challenging to enable us to deliver a fair and consistent contingency approach for all teams and participants, and importantly, to provide confidence in the safety of spectators. All fans with tickets to those cancelled matches will receive a full refund. We are, of course, continuing to review Sunday's matches and making every effort to ensure that they will be played as scheduled. A thorough assessment of the venues will take place after the typhoon has passed, before a final decision is made on Sunday morning. Based on the advice of the government authorities and the experts, World Rugby and the Japan Rugby 2019 Organising Committee are advising all fans in the Tokyo, Yokohama and City of Toyota areas to stay indoors on Saturday, not to travel, and to keep monitoring the Rugby World Cup 2019 digital and social channels for further updates.
Rugby World Cup boss Alan Gilpin speaking a short time ago. Now, as mentioned, Scotland's do-or-die match against hosts Japan on Sunday at this stage is still going ahead, but could still be under threat. A decision on that game won't be made until Sunday morning. Well, joining us now from Disneyland Tokyo, where the All Blacks were due to hold a press conference to name their team for Saturday, is our sports reporter Joe Porter. Joe, the All Blacks, this must be pretty disappointing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. They were set to name their strongest possible side for this Italian clash in Toyota, of course, as they look to build towards next week's quarterfinals in the knockout stage and peak for that game. So, yeah, bitterly disappointing for the All Blacks. I guess it removes the risk of any of their star players or key players being injured in their final pool game, but it leaves them well and truly underdone heading into the quarterfinals, almost 2 weeks off between their last game and that first knockout clash, and they will be very, very disappointed that they don't get to have a good run against Italy, put in a strong and commanding performance and set their rivals on notice while picking their strongest team. The flip side, yes, they don't get any injury scares, and I guess there's no chance of picking up any red or yellow cards as well, which could lead to suspension. So some silver lining to those clouds.
So should more time have been built in? So, if there were disruptions like this, that the games could be replayed, postponed and played?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that as a fan looking in, wouldn't you? I mean, absolutely disappointing, not only for the teams, but all the fans that have booked tickets to these games. There may well be All Blacks fans over here in Japan that only got that game in the ballot to go and see their team play. So you would think so. However, this tournament's almost 8 weeks long, as it is one of the longest tournaments in the world in terms of sport. And they do have backup days for the knockout stages of the game. So I guess just logistically and a length of time situation made it quite hard for them to do. But you do wonder if they could have had earlier in this tournament foreseen these typhoons coming. It is typhoon season here, and had backup venues on hand for the games to be played. But I guess when you think about the logistical nightmares with public transport being down possibly because of the typhoon, it was all just in the too hard basket. So disappointing, but not terribly surprising given the length already of this tournament.
So who are the All Blacks likely to face on the 19th of October when they finally get their next game?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question, and if I knew the answer or could predict that, I would be able to retire, that's for sure. Look, all three teams, Scotland, Ireland and Japan in Pool A, have a chance of qualifying top or second in that group. All three of those teams in any form or combination of them too as well. So I'm not a code breaker, but that must be a fair amount of different sort of outcomes there. Look, Japan, if the Japan-Scotland game is called off, Japan will qualify top of their group regardless of what Ireland do against Samoa on Saturday. Therefore, Japan would play South Africa in the quarterfinals and New Zealand would likely play Ireland. But however, if Scotland and the Scotland and Japan game goes ahead, it's all on. Any team could qualify top. Scotland could still qualify top. Japan could qualify top. Ireland could qualify top. But if things stay as they are, or if Japan win that game, or if the game is called off against Scotland, Japan would qualify top to play South Africa in the quarterfinals. New Zealand, the All Blacks would play Ireland. England would play Australia, and Wales would play France.
Interesting, Joe, because we have actually been making kind of a flow chart this afternoon with all those options on it, and it is as complicated as anything. So Scotland really are the ones who will be biting their nails, won't they? Because, well, there's a lot riding on this for that team.
Yeah, Scotland, absolutely. They need this game to go ahead to have any chance of making the quarterfinals. If the game against Japan is cancelled, they get 2 points each, like you've mentioned, for a draw. That means Scotland miss out on the quarterfinals. So they'll be desperate for this game to go ahead. I know their coach and team have been putting as much pressure as they can on World Rugby to have this game go ahead. And I've heard that they may leave it till even 6 hours before the match to determine whether it goes ahead. And it possibly could even be played behind closed doors, such as the nature and I guess, so much riding on this game as to who goes through and who doesn't. So it could even be played behind closed doors with no fans if both teams agree to that and World Rugby see fit. It really is a huge ramifications for Scotland. Japan won't mind, of course. They'd top their group if the game is called off. But, yeah, Scotland will really, really be biting their nails and hoping, fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything that this game goes ahead in Yokohama, because it is in the direct path of this typhoon and it's on the Sunday. So really, really, really tough times for Scotland. You've got to feel for them. Imagine being knocked out of a World Cup simply because you didn't get to play because of a typhoon. That would be a real heartbreaker.
Hey, so what are the All Blacks going to do for a week? They're staying in Disneyland, are they?
Look, we're not sure yet. I'm about to find out as we go into this press conference. I would assume that they're not going to go to Nagoya because that would be against the advice of all the Japanese agencies telling the fans and teams not to travel anywhere during this typhoon. So you would assume they stay in Tokyo, likely at the Hilton here at Disneyland, before, of course, figuring out who the quarterfinal opponent is, and then they will move to another hotel in Tokyo, perhaps the same one or perhaps where they were before, a bit closer to the centre of the city. So I imagine they'll just be holding tight like the rest of us, battening down the hatches for Saturday. I doubt very much they'll go to Nagoya. Disappointing for the city of Toyota as well, of course, down there, to miss out on having the All Blacks in their town, but I imagine they'll hang tight in Tokyo. Probably some more hard trainings, but you're looking at a situation where they've got almost 2 weeks before the next game, so it may well turn into the sort of reminiscent of what was down in Beppu, where they were doing a lot of hard training, a lot of physical training against each other, just to try and keep themselves, at the right edge, the right peak, heading towards knockout stage. You'd much rather have a game only a week away, because that's the way they typically build up to test matches. This 2-week break could really throw a bit of a spanner in the works, but I assume they're going to stay in Tokyo, and I will be able to find that out in just a short amount of time.
Thanks, Joe. That is Joe Porter joining us there from, Disneyland. Must feel a bit like Fantasyland now that all this is up in the air with the games. And as mentioned, Joe is heading to that press conference with the All Blacks, and we'll check in with him again after that a little bit later in the program. But let's stick with the sports theme. Spark has scored another point in the battle to become the home of New Zealand sport by securing the rights to cricket played here. Spark Sport has wrestled the rights to broadcast the Black Caps and Whites Ferns matches played in New Zealand for 6 years from April from Sky TV. The pay TV operator has already admitted dropping the ball by losing this year's Rugby World Cup rights, and today's news sent its share price diving to record lows. So what does the future hold for Kiwi sports fans? Business reporter Madison Reedy has the details.
It is a huge deal. It's massive, especially if you're a cricket fan. It's massive.
And it's a massive hit for Sky TV too, and one that sent its share price tumbling. For the first time in 25 years, fans won't be able to watch local cricket matches on Sky after the summer. They can still watch all international matches on the incumbent's pay TV service, but for any Black Caps or White Ferns matches on home turf, fans will have to buy a subscription to Spark Sport. Some of the matches will be broadcast free to air on TVNZ. Hayden Green from Consumer New Zealand says it's great news for fans who want better access.
If you are a cricket fan, it's the easiest and cheapest way to watch cricket, and that's probably the best thing about it. Is I talked to a workmate who's a massive cricket fan, and he's like, "Oh, finally I can watch cricket again." This is great, because under the previous system you had to pay for a whole bunch of sport that you didn't want to watch, plus a whole bunch of TV channels that you didn't want to watch to go with it.
Punters on the streets of Wellington today weren't entirely convinced.
I think it's terrible. I'm going to cancel Sky.
To be honest, I only watched the odd match, and I'll probably just find an illegal stream.
Absolutely distraught, because I care so much. I don't have Sky, and I don't watch cricket, because I have a life.
Sky TV was ducking for cover today, refusing any interviews and saying in a statement that while it would have liked to keep the local cricket rights, it wishes New Zealand cricket well in its new direction. It's the second time Spark has caught Sky out by nabbing big-time sporting rights after it wrestled for this year's Rugby World Cup. However, it has grappled with a number of teething issues with its streaming of the World Cup. Viewers have complained about the game cutting out, pixelating, and in some cases hearing multiple commentaries at a time. But New Zealand Cricket Chief Executive David White isn't worried.
Technology is evolving very quickly and it'll only improve, of course. So we're very confident. I mean, they're a massive digital company, Spark, and we're very confident with the personnel and their expertise.
Although the head of Spark Sport, Jeff Latch, is not making any cast-iron promises.
I've been in live television production for more than 25 years, and there are no guarantees in live TV production. What I can say is that we are very confident moving forward that our platform is going to perform really well for cricket and all the other sports which we're carrying.
Jeff Latch says it's making a number of improvements to its platform over the next 12 months to ensure it's ready for the next cricket season. Over that time, it'll also have to strike a deal with a production company to film the matches. So how much will cricket fans have to dip into their pockets to watch the matches?
We've got a year to work through that. At the moment, we've got 3 different models in play. We've got a Spark Sport Basic, which actually has a raft of different sports properties on it. We've got a specific package around Rugby World Cup matches, and we're also doing match passes, so 3 different ways. And also it will depend on what other rights we secure over the next year. But well in advance of the next cricket season, we will come out and let people know what the pricing is going to be.
Consumer New Zealand's Hayden Green says Spark should create a viewing package for the cricket content. He says that would give consumers more choice than they had with Sky, even though they'll be stretched across both services to watch a full range of local and international cricket.
It kind of gives us more choice. If we end up with another monopoly situation where everything is under the same corporation's umbrella, we're going to get what we had with Sky, which was just this terrible monolith that didn't want to go online, and we were complaining about it forever. Now that we've got more players in the market, we can't then complain that, like, oh, well, they're not everywhere that I want them.
So with a handful of wins so far, fans will be looking to see if Spark can make it a hat-trick when it comes to the next round of rugby rights. For Checkpoint, I'm Madison Reedy.
And it's almost 5:23. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. What do you reckon about the cricket going to Spark? Good, bad or indifferent? Especially would love to hear from you if you're in a rural part of the country where your internet's maybe not that great. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 2 people have been killed in the German city of Halle after a gunman opened fire outside a synagogue. The attack, which happened on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, was live-streamed online by the attacker. Police say they have detained 1 person reported by German media to be a 27-year-old German national. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has again called for a crackdown on anti-Semitism in the country as far-right groups continue to gain political power. From Halle, the BBC's Jenny Hill reports.
Calm, deliberate, shattering the peace of a quiet city. An eyewitness filmed as the gunman, dressed in combat gear, opened fire outside a synagogue in Halle. He'd just tried and failed to shoot his way into the building. A woman was killed as she walked past. This man told us he came face to face with the gunman. I saw a man wearing army clothes with a gun over his shoulder, he says. He was throwing things over the wall of the synagogue cemetery, and then there were 2 explosions. But he wasn't finished. Not far from the synagogue, he attacked a kebab shop, killing a man inside. The gunman is believed to be a German in his late 20s. He wore a head camera and streamed footage online. It's Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. Halle's Jews had to be escorted to safety. This evening, Angela Merkel joined worshippers in Berlin. There's anger that, unlike most other Jewish institutions in this country, there wasn't a police guard outside the building in Halle.
It's been a day of confusion and horror.
People here have now been told they can leave their homes. The security services say these streets are safe. But after what happened here today, Germany's Jewish community may find that hard to believe.
Jenny Hill reporting. The Prime Minister says the Christchurch Call has kicked into action after footage from the shooting attacks was live streamed on Amazon's video gaming platform Twitch. The Christchurch Call is a partnership between governments and tech companies designed to eradicate extremism and terrorism online in the wake of the Christchurch mosque attacks. Jacinda Ardern says because Amazon has signed up to the call, the footage was promptly pulled down.
After the 15th of March in Christchurch, we were very aware that there was every chance that kind of streaming of such a horrific event could happen again. That is why we put in place the Christchurch Call to Action. Now, I've seen that there's reporting that this was live stream on a platform where that platform owner, Amazon, joined the Christchurch Call in New York. So the Christchurch Call, the incident protocol that we've developed has kicked in. Companies are communicating, as I understand, with one another to ensure that that video does not spread online.
And that was Jacinda Ardern talking about the role of the Christchurch Call. Wannabe police recruits will only have to pass 1, not 2 fitness tests to get into police training college. The physical competency test, which is in essence an obstacle course, has been ditched as of this month. In the past, applicants have had to catapult themselves over an almost 6-foot wall, scramble through a window, over hurdles, push a trailer and get over a 2.2-ish metre fence within a certain time frame. But they'll still have to pass it before they can graduate at the end of 16 weeks at police college. And there's one other physical hurdle to get selected for training. So why the changes? I asked Superintendent Melanie Aitken.
It hasn't gone completely. It's still in once you get into the college, but our evidence has shown that. So we still have another form of testing, physical testing, which is called the physical appraisal test, which potential recruits have to go through prior to getting to college. And that has been evidence to show that if you can achieve that test, then you're just as capable of achieving the PCT as well in terms of fitness ability.
So just to be clear though, I'm talking about the prerequisites to get into the training college. So you no longer have to pass that physical competency test to get accepted into training college.
That's correct, because we have the physical appraisal test, and then once the individual is at the college, they then go through the physical competency test once at the college.
So you've had expert advice that these 2 tests, well, they basically measure the same level of fitness, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And they measure different things, but in essence, the PAT, the physical appraisal test, is just as good a test of a person's level of fitness as the PCT. So we now are adopting the PCT once the individual is at college.
Because the thing is, if you look at these, and you can watch them online, these tests, the one that you've scrapped as an entry requirement is basically an obstacle course. You jump over a 6-foot wall, you have to wiggle your way through a window, there's hurdles, you drag a trailer and the equivalent of a body, and you have to get over a 2.2 metre high fence, right? So there is a lot of, dexterity measured in that test, which is not measured in the other test. So while fitness levels may be equal, the skill base is not exactly the same, is it?
So the PCT is a functional test, and so the purpose of that is establishing, staff's ability in a controlled environment. And so, yes, the 2 tests are different, but the research and evidence has proven that if you are capable of the PAT, then going and doing the PCT, you don't need both to be able to get in. So that's why we are now adopting this and not requiring the PCT prior to getting to college.
But you want them to be able to do those things because you're going to require them to pass that test before they can graduate. So some people looking at this will think that you're lowering the bar to entry to college. Are you?
Right, so not at all, and the evidence has proven to us, which I've just explained. The really great thing about ensuring that, our recruits cannot leave college without having passed the PCT. But having it focused on at the college is in a really controlled environment. So if we're thinking about an individual's safety in performing those tasks, they've got the time, they've got the ability to put into to training in the appropriate manner at the college to be able to pass the PCT where we can test them there. So it's a really good situation to be in, to be fair.
Well, there's a couple of things there. Isn't it a sign of commitment that you turn up having worked on your fitness and be able to pass this test before you get into the police? It shows you're motivated, doesn't it? And you've taken away that.
Oh, we certainly haven't taken away anybody's motivation. Passing the PAT in itself...
Proof of the motivation.
Yeah, individuals have to pass the PAT, which in itself is proof of motivation to getting to college. That in itself is no mean feat to be able to pass. So we're very confident that this is not about lowering standards, but ensuring that we have the right people tested in a controlled environment, and leaving the college, they have to pass the PCT. So it's no change, really.
So are you telling me that after... Because you pay recruits while they train, and I'm sure it costs a lot of money in the 16-week program to put them through, that there's not going to be a little bit of leniency because you're going to want these people to graduate after you've invested so much in them, and if they can't get over a wall, where's the guarantee that you're not going to turn a blind eye to that?
Oh, look, I can absolutely reassure you. I lead the physical side of our staff, and our trained team of physical education officers are a team of professionals where they are not going to be putting. You're challenging to your integrity, I'd suggest there, and I just don't think that's very fair.
Are either of these two tests relevant? Because I suppose policing has changed a lot over the years. One wonders if you rely more on data-driven policing, computers, etc. Do you still need these tests at all?
Yeah, look, we're really mindful that, how we police is changing in terms of the environment we police in. What we do know is the test we currently have is deemed gold standard across, internationally. But we're also mindful that, the last review on our testing was in 2011. So we will be looking at reviewing in the coming year the current PCT as it stands, and if it's fit for purpose or what needs to change to be ensuring that our people, when they're out there policing, are in the best physical shape they can be to respond to the needs of the community.
And that's Superintendent Melanie Aitken there. And figures from January 19th to the 1st of October 2019 show that approximately 6% of people trying to get into police training college failed the physical competency test. That test no longer is required until they graduate. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a former Sonoda resident reveals that his departure from the Canterbury Hall of Residence wasn't noticed. Why Shane Jones is considering reining in forestry conversions, and what rural residents make of Spark scooping up the cricket. We would love your feedback, especially if you're a cricket watcher, or you've got any views on the changes in the police, the physical component of the police test to get into training college. Get in touch by texting us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to the headlines, 5:30ish headlines with Susanna.
Rugby World Cup organisers have had to scrap the All Blacks pool match against Italy as Japan braces for Super Typhoon Hagibis. It means the All Blacks are now top of their pool and Italy has been eliminated. The England-France game on Saturday has also been cancelled. The lawyer for journalist Nikki Hager says there's nothing to stop security agencies from illegally accessing phone logs again. The Acting Inspector General of Intelligence and Security says the SIS had no reasonable grounds to get Mr Hager's information, nor that of his source. Lawyer Felix Geiringer says an SIS apology isn't enough and action is needed to prevent it happening again. The new Treasury boss has had to apologise to the Finance Minister after a second lapse over confidential information. Earlier this year, the agency allowed fragments of the budget documents to be accessed by the opposition, and Treasury has now admitted the early publishing of a section of the government's financial statements. It says it was on its way website for about an hour, but removed before it was seen. The chief censor has classified a live stream of the shooting attacks in Germany overnight as objectionable. The gunman, who makes anti-Semitic remarks in the video and calls himself a Holocaust denier, attacked a synagogue and a kebab shop in Halle, killing 2 people. The chief censor, David Shanks, says it is illegal for anyone in this country to view, possess or distribute the material in any form, including on social media. Health officials say they hope measles cases have now peaked after the worst outbreak in 20 years. Nationwide, the total number of cases is almost 1,700, with the vast majority in the Auckland region. A new batch of MMR vaccine has been quality checked and passed on to DHBs for distribution around the country. A fire at a historic building in central Whangarei is now under control, but has severely damaged its clock tower. Fire crews were called to the municipal building on Bank Street just before 1 this afternoon. And emergency services are responding to a fire on farmland in Danzies Pass in North Otago. Fire and Emergency says the fire is about 30 by 20 metres wide and should be extinguished quickly. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just tuned in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to business now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. KiwiSaver people are probably being overcharged for the services they get from fund managers. Now, this is according to the Financial Markets Authority. Are we all being overcharged?
Well, the Kiwi, they don't look specifically, but they look overall. And in the last year, they did a review and they say, hey, how come KiwiSaver fund managers made 17% more on fees than they did the year before? Like $480 million of fees and all sorts. And they're saying, please explain. How come this costs so much? Now, some people say, well, because some fund managers are active fund managers and some are passive. And say Simplicity, for example, would be a passive fund manager. So you just pay a very low fee and things are just basically automated. Or...
Okay, hold that thought, Nona, because I think, let's explain. Can you explain to me in simple terms the difference between active and passive?
Yeah. So the active fund managers charge a bit more. And that could account for, the difference and why fees would go up. Well, so what's the difference between an active and a passive? Well, before we get to that, I just have to say that some research shows that over 50% of Kiwi savers are in the wrong type of plan to begin with. So they're in a conservative fund, that's a default fund, and so they're getting nothing much more than if you put cash in the bank. Or they're in a fund, maybe they're in a really aggressive fund, but they're getting close to retirement. So they could lose all their money by the time they retire in just a few years. So they don't have time to recover. So you've really got to be sure about where you are. Once you are, though, then you have to decide whether you want an active plan or a passive one. And that's what's really important. So a passive manager would look after, say, a cash account. What do you need anybody special to tell you what's in your cash account? You're not getting anything special about it. There's no magic wand saying, well, I can get you an extra %. But let's say it's an aggressive fund. Now that's different because in that case, you would want somebody to carefully choose which kinds of companies you're investing in. You want to make sure you're going to, invest in the right ones. And then you need an active manager. Of course, if you've got someone who's actively managing your account, you'd expect to pay higher fees.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because around that debate, some people who are with passive funds, are operating passive funds, say that over the long term, they're both returning about the same.
Yes, and we have some research from another firm that is an active manager, and this one is Kiwi Invest. They just published a white paper, which is basically a paper with lots of research and footnotes in it. And they suggest that, no, history does not back up what the passive fund
managers
proponents are saying, because over time, say 60 years that we've had passive investments, active management has paid off better. And in New Zealand, that is certainly true. Our active managed funds perform better than the passive ones. But that's we're a smaller country, and perhaps we, are able to do that better. Who knows? But if you go globally, it might be a different story. But certainly in New Zealand, for now, the active managers. But hey, look, the debate is open. Believe me, there's no end of questions about it. So we'll hear more about this because the Please Explain is for everyone, and they're going to have to justify, because there are some people who call themselves an active manager, but they're really not. Just saying.
Okay, please explain. Can't wait.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
What else has been happening on the markets
Well,
today, Nona?
we did have a story earlier about Spark and Sky with that whole thing on the cricket. So Spark's share price fell 3%. And Sky TV's fell nearly 21% on that news. Yes, indeed. That certainly dragged down the index. We fell 0.5% by 54 points to 10,887. But our Kiwi is trading steady at 63.2 US, 93.6 Australian, and 51.6 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business wrap. The All Blacks press conference is underway in Japan. Coach Steve Hansen has told reporters cancelling this weekend's pool game against Italy was a no-brainer as Super Typhoon Hagibis prepares to make landfall. He's told media the team found out the game had been cancelled this morning and safety is paramount. We will have more from our reporter Joe Porter, who is there at the press conference. He'll join us shortly after 6 tonight. Turkey has launched an offensive against Kurdish forces in northeast Syria following the withdrawal of US forces in the region. Now, civilians have been forced to flee as Turkish airstrikes and artillery rain down on villages and towns close to the Syria-Turkey border. The international community has condemned the move, with the UN Security Council due to hold an emergency meeting overnight. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the start of his long-threatened military offensive against Kurdish forces in northeast Syria, nicknamed Operation Peace Spring. He claims the action will rid Syria of a corridor of terror in the border region. But the Kurds who helped the US and Syria defeat Islamic State say the attack is the next chapter in a decades-long war with the Turkish state for greater cultural and political rights. The BBC's Orla Guerin is on the border.
In Syria, a new round of warfare. The town of Ras Al Ain under heavy bombardment. One of several just inside the border in the Kurdish-controlled northeast. It's the start of a Turkish offensive that is alarming Europe, has been condemned by America, and is bringing fresh instability to the Middle East. And once again, Syrian civilians forced to flee. A local journalist saw them go.
Thousands of people immigrating to the south side. The Turkish army are shelling by mortars everywhere.
From across the border in Turkey, we could see smoke rising in the town of Talabiyat. The BBC understands Turkish troops are now on the ground there. Well, here at the border, we have been seeing and hearing the opening salvos in Turkey's assault on northeastern Syria. In the last half an hour or so, we've heard mortar rounds and artillery fire, and there has been incoming mortar fire from Syria. President Erdogan is calling this Operation Peace Springs, but for civilians across the border on the Syrian side, this is going to feel like one more round of battle in an agonisingly long war. Turkey says the aim of this offensive is to create a safe zone along its border and allow 2 million Syrian refugees to go home. Today it was creating new ones. Ankara also wants to drive out Syrian Kurdish forces it views as terrorists.
That area is needed for our safety and security, for the Syrian refugees to go back to, so that they can go back to their normal lives, and there is no vacuum to be filled by any terrorist network, and also to make sure that Syria is not divided territorially.
But Turkey's assault on the Kurds could be costly. They've been crucial in the fight against Islamic State and are holding 10,000 IS prisoners. Now they'll have to focus on resisting Turkey. Tonight at the border, rockets in the night sky. The invasion is well underway as worried nations look on.
Orla Guerin with that report. It is almost 6:15. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Forestry Minister Shane Jones is considering reining in forestry conversions after a rural backlash. He's also warned foreign-owned forestry companies, which make up nearly 75% of the industry, that unless they provide more access for local processors to get timber, they could face an oil and gas style ban. Now, this comes from a government that's made it easier for overseas investors to buy land for forestry, but is now faced with provincial towns telling them their farm servicing centres are being hollowed out. In-depth journalist Guyon Espiner sat down with Shane Jones, who was both Forestry and Regional Development Minister, and asked him why the government wanted to sell forestry land to foreigners in the first place.
If forestry is to play a bigger role for climate change, and if forestry is to play a bigger role in environmental outcomes, halting the erosion and degradation of our waterways through the loss of soil, then I think it's just a pragmatic stance that New Zealand First, which is predominantly an economic patriotic party, but we have to recognise that 75% of the forest sector is already owned internationally, and the facts of the matter are we are not massively increasing. That's what the data shows. We're not massively increasing foreign encroachment into our forestry landscape. We've actually just simplified it for the existing owners to continue to trade in and out.
If 75% of the forestry industry is in foreign hands, does that mean most of the profits of this industry are going back overseas as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, if foreigners invest in our forest sector, obviously they came here in the 1990s wanting to put their money at risk and then repatriate the dividends overseas, which is why I'm saying to the extent that they want to continue holding these assets in New Zealand, I look forward at the next election campaign at promoting more ideas. I only got 7% of the vote this time, so not many of those ideas enjoyed traction. But, you know, I'd say to the Kiwis that are operating on behalf of the foreigners, if you're not going to look after your neighbours, don't underestimate the capacity of governments to change the rules. Oil and gas looms large.
What would you like them to do to have more skin in the game in New Zealand and put more in than they're not doing?
Ideally, I'd like to see more foreign investors enjoying exposure to the whole vertical chain. Planting the trees, husbanding the trees, having interest in sawmills, having interest in processing capacity, so that the envelope goes from the stem of the tree to the quality of the board coming out of the sawmill. That is not the case at the moment. There are some signal exceptions to that. I have to acknowledge the Japanese. The Japanese, I think, in many respects have been model citizens, but they're a minority.
And what about the impact on some of these small towns? I mean, they're worried, aren't they, that these service towns in the Wairarapa and other places around New Zealand are going to move to a sort of the hustle and bustle of a sheep or beef farm to one where people sit around and watch trees grow for 30 years.
Yeah. So there's a lot of myth-making and fishtails in that regard. The reality is that forestry occupies about 1.2 million hectares. I think there's 8.5 million hectares for farmland. Farmland is not being conquered in any time soon, so let's deal with the facts. Secondly, the number of workers per hectare for forestry is nigh on 20 per hectare when you consider the 35,000 employees in the forest sector across only 1.2 million hectares of land. It is vastly higher than sheep and beef.
It's sporadic, though, isn't it? It's sporadic, though, isn't it, Minister? I mean,
that's what I'm about to say. The reality is, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that land use is in a state of transition, and that transition was happening before I became the minister. But I'm alert to the concerns of Mayor Little in particular in Wairoa. But then I say to the cockies, well, what do you want us to do? Because it's your neighbours that are selling these farms. And quite frankly, the majority of them are not being sold to foreigners, they're being sold to other Kiwis. And probably what's driving those transactions is a perception about the value of carbon in the new forestry carbon industry. And in that sense, that's how the system is meant to work, but there's some big political challenges there.
Well, that's right, because, I mean, you are providing the incentives, though. Are you saying, come on in and buy this land or convert this land? Is that not why we've seen a jump in the value of forestry land? Because it's becoming more attractive.
Yeah, But I just want Kiwis to bear in mind, for the last 10 years, we introduced 100,000 cows per year for 10 years. The vast majority of the land conversion has been from forestry into farming. And now we're seeing a small reversion from farming back to forestry. But stick with the facts, for the last 10 years, 100,000 cows per year. So we are, I don't want to shy away from it. We're in the midst of a land transition process. We are correcting what I think has been a massive gamble on farming, particularly dairy. And I think society has spoken through the election process. The trick for me is to help manage that transition, that it is not fatally disruptive.
So how far do you want to go with this pendulum change?
I think that, look, I've asked for some advice as to whether or not what we should be promoting is forestry in marginal precipitous country. Lord knows how you measure that. But more importantly, whether or not our focus should be on farm forestry into the future, and whether that would anchor more Kiwis wanting to continue to own their land. There's one area, perversely enough, where this doesn't affect, and which is why it's been a pleasure working with Māori, because their land can never ever be sold, and short of some sort of fiscal hurricane. And they're the ones who have embraced probably the the $240 odd million. Māoridom have stepped up to the plate, including the JVs, to play a big role in forestry because they don't have the drama of having to sell their land. But my message to the farmers is that land use is in a state of transition, and forestry is going to continue to occupy and grow in those marginal precipitous areas. And if that ends the degradation of our environment and leads to better land use outcomes over time, then farm forestry represents a recipe how they can stay on the land and profit.
Do you see a conflict in tension between your role as a regional development champion and a forestry minister when some of these small towns are saying, hey, you're killing my town?
Yeah, I feel it deeply, I do. Why do I feel it deeply? Just study where I came from. My dad was one of 17 children. I grew up in Awanui. I saw what happened to small rural towns in the 80s. I was on a farm with my parents when that happened. I know exactly what that feels like. If there are things that I need to do, either through mitigation or other sorts of interventions, then I want people to know I'm up for that challenge. But I also want people to accept primary industry in New Zealand, which is largely rural industry, we are going through a reset. Whether this government is here or not, the reset is taking place before our eyes.
Shane Jones speaking there to Guyon Espiner, and you can read more on the Green Rush series in the in-depth section on rnz.co.nz. Campus Living Villages, which runs the Sonada Hall of Residence, says it has added extra security for the safety of students and will make any changes the independent investigators recommend. In a statement released to Checkpoint a few minutes ago, CLV's Group Managing Director, John Schroeder, says the independent investigation by former High Court Judge Kit Toogood will be thorough. He says, as a father of 5 university and school-aged children, I am deeply perturbed and want an answer to the same question this investigation is considering. How was this young man missed? That young man is, of course, Mason Pendris, whose body lay undiscovered in his room at the Sonada Hall of Residence for at least 4 weeks. His stepfather, Anthony Holland, told Checkpoint last night he wanted answers as his son's body was only discovered when another student climbed onto the roof of the apartment block to look into his window. Mr. Holland told us nobody noticed his son was missing, despite him not turning up to lectures or for meals. Sonada won't be offering accommodation for first-year students next year. It says that was a joint decision it made with Canterbury University. But tonight we can reveal another student disappeared from Sonada's 6-year years earlier and nobody noticed he was missing either. RNZ in-depth journalist Max Toll has written of his own experience at the Hall of Residence. In 2013, Max Toll moved into Sonada but later moved out. He kept paying the bills and apparently his departure went unnoticed. I asked Max what led him to that particular Hall of Residence in the first place.
I lived with my parents for a couple of years and flatted for a year, and then I went to live overseas for a year, and when I came back to do a postgraduate course, it was really quite a tight time frame, and just for convenience I decided to live at one of the halls. But being an older student, being a postgraduate student, I was looking for something a bit more private at the same time, and Sonada really stood out for me. It was sort of marketed towards the older, I guess more keep to themselves students, which really appealed to me, and to be honest, that was really the experience that I had.
So can you tell me what it was like to live there? Did you ever see these resident assistants, and what are the living arrangements like?
So there were a bunch of separate buildings. Within my building at least there were 4 corridors, 2 downstairs, 2 upstairs, and 4 or 5 people living on each corridor. There was a common room which I really didn't go into very much, but you might see the RA in there now and again. There were the odd movie nights, board game nights, the odd events organised, but again I can't really remember too many people going to those. It was a fine place to live. It was relatively inexpensive, and again, I was sort of left to my own devices, and whilst I got to know a few of the people in my corridor, I didn't really mingle too much with the people in the rest of the halls. There weren't really too many opportunities to do that, and I mostly spent a lot of time away from Sonada.
So, did you ever, have cause to talk to the resident assistants, or did they know who you were?
No, I don't think I ever had cause to talk to them. May have been a passing conversation at some point, but no, I really didn't have much to do with them. There were only 2 of them for what was quite a big hall, so they were managing a large group of students, but no, I don't think they ever learned my name, for instance.
When you moved out, what happened?
Yeah, so towards the back half of the school year, I started seeing someone, and we became close, and I would essentially moved in with her, with my partner, and really only came back to my room at Sonada once a week, maybe, just to sort of change clothes, pick up a few belongings, something like that. And yeah, for about 2 or 3 months I was living with my girlfriend essentially, and weeks went by. No one at the university would contact me. One of the people who was living in my corridor alongside me did get in touch just to double check, I was okay. I think he sort of assumed that I had moved in with this person, but was just double checking to make sure that I had. And yeah, I mean, realistically, no one really knew I was gone.
So, to be clear, Max, while one student got in contact after a number of weeks, nobody official from the actual residence noticed that you had disappeared from there?
No. No. Plain and simple.
So when the Vice-Chancellor of Canterbury University says that the circumstances of Mason Pendris's death are inconceivable, do you agree with that characterisation?
Mason's death is tragic. I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to minimise what happened to him, and the fact that his body went 4 weeks without being discovered is also tragic, and I suppose it is in some ways hard to comprehend, but at the same time, having lived in Sonada, having experienced Sonada life, having experienced uni hall life, I think the Vice-Chancellor is completely wrong. It's not inconceivable, it's entirely conceivable. When I read the story when it came out originally, to be honest, I wasn't surprised, not even remotely surprised. University is becoming increasingly quite a distant experience. You've got lectures that are videotaped so you can watch them in your bedroom or at home. You've got tutorials being reduced at some universities because they're trying to save money. I think you could get a degree by staying at home and maybe turning up for the exams or once or twice a year. That's sort of the university experience, and I think other halls compared to Sonada might be different. Sonada is as I said, quite a private experience, more private than, say, University Hall at Canterbury. But no, to call it inconceivable, I think is wrong. I don't think it's the question we should be asking, or I don't think it's what we should be saying at this point in time.
And you can read all about Max Toll's experience at the Hall in his piece in the in-depth section on rnz.co.nz. Time for some of your feedback now, and you feel very strongly about cricket, it seems. This person's got in touch to say, Spark Sport, great news. Live rurally near Opotiki, Bay of Plenty, have VDSL 25 megabytes per second and have been watching lots of RWC without interruption. Use Spark Sport app cast to TV. Easy, good on you, Spark. Not everyone agrees, though. Clive says, after 6 consecutive weeks of unwatchable Premier League streaming, I've had to cancel my Spark subscription. And Lindsay says, I live in Waipukaro. Our internet services VDSL sports coverage on Spark Sport is stuttering at best and frozen at worst. The bigger the matches, the more stuttering the coverage. Until Spark can guarantee reliable coverage to all areas, they need to provide alternative coverage. There you have it.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says the cancellation of the team's Rugby World Cup clash against Italy this weekend is a no-brainer. Cup officials pulled the plug on the game this afternoon because of the threat from Super Typhoon Hagibis, expected to be one of the most violent storms to hit the region in recent years. Hansen has just told a press conference in Japan that the team found out about the threat this morning and that safety is paramount. The All Blacks' final pool games were to be played in Toyota City, at a venue likely to be severely impacted by the storm. Rugby World Cup boss Alan Gilpin says other venues couldn't be secured.
We looked pretty exhaustively over the last few days at all of the options. Where we are now in terms of cancelling matches is entirely in accordance with what we laid out before the tournament. The matches in the pool phase wouldn't be postponed or relocated. We couldn't guarantee consistent contingency plans across those games safely for all of the teams and the fans involved.
Alan Gilpin urged rugby fans in Japan to stay indoors and not to travel. The journalist Nikki Hager's lawyer says there's nothing to stop security agencies from unlawfully obtaining phone logs again. The Defence Force asked the SIS to help its investigation into claims made in Hager's 2011 book about the New Zealand military and intelligence activity in the Middle East. The Acting Inspector General of Intelligence and Security says the SIS unlawfully got Hager's phone records as well as those of a Defence Force officer suspected of being his source. Lawyer Felix Geiringer says it appears there were no checks in place to prevent the SIS acting unlawfully, and nothing's been done since to stop it happening again. The chief censor has classified a live stream of the shooting attacks in Germany overnight as objectionable. In the video, the gunman is reported to have made anti-Semitic remarks, calling himself a Holocaust denier. The attacks on a synagogue and a kebab shop left 2 people dead and at least 2 others injured. The chief censor, David Shanks, says it is illegal for anyone in this country to view, possess or distribute the material in any form, including on social media.
It's too early to say how many New Zealanders may have viewed it. What appears to be the case at this point is that this live stream video has not gone viral in the same way that the March 15 attack live stream video did.
David Shanks says he will work with Internal Affairs to monitor the situation. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government has done all it can for the family of a psychiatric patient who died in a Samoan prison. Hans Dalton's body was found half submerged in a water drum in a Tawhaingata prison cell on Boxing Day in 2012. Annika Smith reports.
A coronial inquest last year was severely hampered by Samoan authorities, who refused to hand over official information and even pulled a witness at the last minute. In the end, Coroner Peter Ryan couldn't determine how Mr Dalton died and, crucially, couldn't rule out homicide. Mr Dalton's mother, Christine Wilson, has previously met with the Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister Winston Peters to ask for help, but says nothing has changed. Ms Wilson says she expects more from the government, but Jacinda Ardern says there's nothing more the ministry can do. She says the family was supported through the court process, which now lies in the jurisdiction of Samoa. Ko Annika Smith-Aho.
The Dunedin flat, where a second-year university student died at the weekend, will be run as an Otago University flat next year. The university has today clarified its plans for the century-old villa in Dundas Street, where Sophia Crestani, a 19-year-old from Wellington, was fatally injured as hundreds of people stampeded at a party on Saturday night. The university will be taking on the lease of the building known as the Manor, and a spokesperson has told RNZ it will house second or third year students with a relationship to Studholme College, which is about 50 metres away. Donald Trump has defended his decision to withdraw US troops from Syria and enable a Turkish offensive against US-backed Kurdish fighters in the region by noting the Kurds didn't fight alongside the US in the Second World War. Kurdish forces fought alongside the US against the Islamic State for nearly 5 years, losing roughly 11,000 fighters. But Mr Trump suggested the Kurds were more interested in fighting for their own land than helping the US.
They didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example. They mentioned names of different battles. They were there, but they're there to help us with their land, and that's a different thing. In addition to that, we have spent tremendous amounts of money on helping the Kurds in terms of ammunition, in terms of weapons, in terms of money, in terms of pay.
Donald Trump. During the Second World War, the Kurds were part of Turkey, which remained neutral until February 1945 before entering the war on the side of the Allies against Germany and Japan. A fire at an historic building in central Whangarei is now under control but has severely damaged its clock tower. Fire crews were called to the municipal building on Bank Street just before 1 this afternoon. Katie Scotcher reports.
Images of the blaze show the building's clock tower has been gutted by fire and there are large holes in the roof. 8 fire trucks were earlier tackling the blaze from outside of the building. Fire and Emergency say the fire is under control and crews are now working inside the building. There have been no reports of injuries. Call Katie Scotcher Aho.
It's 6 minutes past 6. The All Blacks will go into their Rugby World Cup quarter-final not having played for almost 2 weeks. As we heard in the news, Rugby World Cup organisers have cancelled Saturday's games between the All Blacks and Italy and England and France because of the threat of Typhoon Hagibis. England and France have already booked a spot in the quarter-finals, but Sunday's key game between hosts Japan and Scotland remains in doubt. With Japan and Scotland still chasing a place in the knockout round, any decision to cancel the match will have a big impact on the final placings, with officials holding off on a final decision until game day on Sunday. If Japan's match is cancelled, the hosts would go into the quarterfinals for the first time and consign Ireland to second place, as long as they beat Samoa in their final pool game, putting them into a quarterfinal against the All Blacks. National Rugby League stars Jason Taumalolo and Andrew Fifita will spearhead a full-strength Tonga squad to play Australia and Great Britain and New Zealand after a potential player boycott never materialised. The restoration of coach Christian Wolf has ensured Tonga could name an imposing 21-strong squad featuring 17 members of the 2017 World Cup side. Tonga play Great Britain in Hamilton on October the 26th and the Kangaroos in Auckland a week later. Holden's Jamie Whincup has emerged fastest in the opening practice session for this weekend's Bathurst 1000. The fastest of the New Zealand drivers was Shane van Gisbergen in another Holden in 5th. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, William Dart explores the new horizons of Sharon Crow and Iggy Pop, which will go nicely with a window on the world of megastars and their eating habits, while Fergus Barrowman shares some new jazz releases, including this from Chrissy Hind. Until you've learned the meaning of the blues. On Nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Scattered rain becoming persistent and heavier from the west tonight. Rain turning to a few showers tomorrow morning or afternoon, but mainly fine from Taranaki southwards. Possible thunderstorms tomorrow morning in Northland. For Gisborne to Wairarapa, high clouds, scattered rain spreading north tonight and tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, rain clearing before dawn tomorrow morning. Isolated showers developing tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls. Canterbury, cloudy periods and a few showers. Otago and Southland, occasional rain, more persistent from tonight. Snow lowering to 500 metres in Southland and 800 metres in Otago later tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine, low cloud or fog developing tonight. A period of rain tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The All Blacks will go 13 days without a Rugby World Cup match after World Rugby made the unprecedented decision to cancel their final pool game against Italy on Saturday as Japan braces for Super Typhoon Hagibis. Now, get out your pens. This is the flowchart of what happens next. France's match against England has also been cancelled, and depending on the severity and damage caused by the typhoon, Scotland's must-win match against host Japan in what has been dubbed the pool of death will have anxious fans on the edge of their seats. Scotland currently sit third in Pool A, and a cancelled game this Sunday would more than likely keep them out of the quarterfinals. England, France and New Zealand will not play again until the quarterfinals, which kick off on Saturday the 19th of October, while the Italian team will now be packing its bags for home. Each team has already been awarded 2 points, as this weekend's cancelled matches were considered by World Rugby as a draw. The typhoon is expected to bring Tokyo to a standstill this weekend with mass disruption to public transport. Fans have been warned to stay indoors until the typhoon passes. All Blacks coach Steve Hansen told a press conference in the last hour the team found out this morning the game had been cancelled. He said he respected the decision and it was a no-brainer because the safety of all players and fans is paramount. He said the All Blacks were prepared for all possibilities.
It was in World Rugby in their plan, and these guys have about 25 typhoons a year, so and a heck of a lot of earthquakes. So in our planning, we had to take that into consideration. Did we think that we'd get a game cancelled? No, but that's out of our control. But immediately, that it's happened. Now we adapt and adjust, and that's what you've got to do on the park, and you've got to do it off the park sometimes.
All Blacks coach Steve Hansen. Meanwhile, our reporter Vinnie Wiley is currently in Oita, where Wales played Fiji last night. He asked fans what they thought about the matches being cancelled.
You can't really have a situation where you get the draw games, can you? Because it's just not right. Imagine if New Zealand, drew in Namibia, just wouldn't go down very well with it. So.
I guess so, but then if that's the price, then that's the price. I mean, it's nobody wants that, do they? You want all games to be played, but you can't do anything about the weather.
Oh, it's not good if it's cancelled. Any game being cancelled is bad news, which is good for the Japanese probably, but I don't think anyone's happy with a cancellation. I don't think anybody wants to see 0-0 draws, but so be it.
It definitely has an impact. Obviously not so much with France and England, because that was just deciding who wins. But Japan and Scotland, that will be massive if that game's not played.
Our sports reporter Joe Porter has been at the All Blacks press conference and joins us now live. Joe, how disappointed were the All Blacks?
Yeah, very disappointed. I mean, obviously they were desperate to play. Steve Hansen and Kieran Reid sort of towing the company line and saying that there are positives to take out of not playing, which of course means there's no chance of getting cards in this game or future suspensions as they head towards the knockout finals. Not as much chance of getting injuries. But when I bumped into Dane Coles, Hooker Dane Coles in the hallway heading up to the press conference, and his words when I asked him how he felt about being called off were expletive. Expletive sucks. So it's obvious that the players were desperate to play and get some game time under their belt and head towards this quarterfinal with a strong performance. That's what they need. That's how they peak and prepare for these things. So it certainly is a little bit of a sticking point for the All Blacks. They much rather would have played, but when it comes down to it, people's safety over here, the fans' safety, the players' safety does have to be paramount. And, of course, it's a World Rugby decision and there's nothing they can do. So, yeah, very disappointed, of course, not to play. A lot of sympathy for the Italians who actually had a chance to make the quarterfinals should they have pulled off a miraculous win over the All Blacks. So sympathy for the Italians who don't even get that shot. That's been robbed of them and are disappointed not to play. And now they have to think about how they approach the next 2 weeks. You'd imagine there'd be some fairly physical trainings in-house going on as they try and get themselves match ready for what will be a sudden death game.
Yeah, well, it's a long time between drinks, isn't it? It's 13 days between games, and by the time they play their quarter-final, it'll be a month since they played South Africa. I mean, how big is the risk that they're going to be off the boil?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a genuine risk. They would have prepared for this tournament knowing that Italy was their last game, that they wanted to pick their strongest possible side, and then, of course, they come out of that match, hopefully with a good, solid performance, with another week, just like they would build into a test match normally before the quarterfinals. So they would come down, recover, back into a test week Monday. Now that throws this all out the window. The coaches are going to have to come up with some strategies as to how to keep their guys on edge and mentally prepared without, I guess, losing focus and without trying to peak too early, because we saw what happened down in Canada after 10 days off, against Canada after 10 days off. The players came out and were a little bit too nervous, a little bit over-eager and made some mistakes because they hadn't played in so long. They were just desperate to get out there. The same could be said against Namibia too, with many of those players having not played against Canada. So it really does make things a little bit tricky in terms of not only their physical preparation and being somewhat underdone match-wise, but also their mental preparation. The players were getting ready. They were absolutely peaking their psychology, if you will, for this game, and now they have to come back down to earth, refocus on something that's almost 2 weeks away. So certainly it will provide some challenges because it's very much out of the norm for the All Blacks.
And so where will they ride out the typhoon?
Well, it's not quite certain at this point. They're heading to the Conrad Hotel next week on Monday, which is a little bit closer to Tokyo City, the central city. It would appear they weren't entirely sure, but they'll stay at the Hilton Hotel for the next couple of days, bunker down on Saturday and ride out the typhoon here. So I'm assuming another couple of days at Disneyland for the All Blacks, and perhaps maybe a chance for them to do a little bit more relaxing and try and perhaps take their minds off the rugby, because they're going to have to really refocus and resettle and reshuffle how they approach this game. So, yeah, maybe a couple more visits to Disneyland for Sevu Reece.
And when are we going to know if Scotland's must-win game, which is against Japan, whether that's going to go ahead?
Well, the organisers said they'll make a call on Sunday morning. They'll leave it as late as 6 hours before the game. So the game kicks off at 7:45 Japan time, which is 11:45 New Zealand time on Saturday night. So 6 hours before that. So you can, I guess, around 6 p.m, 5 p.m. New Zealand time on Saturday, the organisers have to make a call. And, yeah, the Scotsmen will be absolutely crossing everything they've got in their bodies, because this is their only chance of going through to the quarterfinals. And it would be an absolute travesty if they were robbed of that chance by weather at this tournament. It would really be a crime against the game. So let's hope it doesn't come to that. Of course, even if the weather is good and the typhoon is passed on Sunday, that doesn't necessarily mean the game can be played. If the storm does a lot of damage, the infrastructure could be damaged, the public transport systems could be damaged, the stadium could be damaged, the ground could be damaged. So there are many variables at play here that could affect that game. Let's just hope it doesn't happen, and let's hope the game does get to go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. That's Joe Porter, fresh out of the All Blacks press conference there. Apologies for the slightly scratchy line. And just some breaking news. Former Air New Zealand boss Christopher Luxon has reportedly revealed he's throwing his hat into the ring to be the National Party candidate in Botany. One News reported that Mr Luxon was standing a short time ago. He was with Air New Zealand for 8 years, 6 of which he was CEO. Now, prior to that, he was NZ CEO of Unilever. And you'll remember that seat in Botany was previously held by Jamie Lee Ross, who fell out with the National Party. We will bring you more on this story as the news comes to hand. And it wasn't just the rugby causing angst amongst sports fans in the country today, with the news that Spark has stumped Sky and bagged the broadcast rights for cricket games in New Zealand from next year. Some fans were pleased, saying they've grown increasingly unhappy with the cost of their Sky subscriptions, and that streaming is the way of the future, particularly if some free-to-air games are on TVNZ. But Lisa Peace, who lives near Otorahanga in Waikato, says she's infuriated at the deal after a frustrating experience streaming the Rugby World Cup with Spark. She says rural people are continually disadvantaged when it comes to watching sport, and she's angry at today's news. She told Alex Perrottet in no uncertain terms what her internet speed is like.
crap. Really slow broadband.
And have you been told anything about when you might get fibre?
No, I've been told nothing. When I inquired about buying the Rugby World Cup, I downloaded the app, and then they test the speed through that, and basically got told that our internet was too slow, and we could either buy it, purchase it, and just watch it, you know, cutting in and out and doing what it's doing to everybody else, or basically take the kids and the family into the local pub.
So what have you done?
Nothing. We've just missed out. Just watched whatever free-to-air games I've put on. But, of course, I don't support just the All Blacks. I wanted to see some Australia games, some Wales games, but nothing.
The ones you wanted to watch, they're an hour late as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you're on Facebook and other things, you get told the score. No, you have to not turn on TV, no social media, no nothing. And, you know, I don't really want to watch delayed anyway. I love live sport.
So what about the cricket thing? What do you think of this news today?
Oh, it's just gutting, because cricket is my main sport. I love it, husband loves it, kids play it. Yeah, and it's just devastating to know we're going to be in the same position. I don't understand how they can bid and win the rights to these things when they can't supply it for the whole of New Zealand. You know, I don't see why you should only get it if you're in big cities like Auckland or Wellington. I paid exactly the same as everybody else. It just infuriates me. I don't see why living rurally we should be punished.
And that was an unhappy Lisa Pease from Otarahanga talking to Alex Perrottet there. We've been getting a lot of feedback on this issue and mixed. Some of you are happy, some not so much. This person says, my rural broadband is capped at 30 gig monthly. The community consists mainly of retirees with no smart TVs, but we love our cricket. Now what do? There's no unlimited broadband service available. We pay a fortune for our wireless service. And someone else says, how about a campaign from Spark to help get us rural folk on board? Would be a great shame not to be able to watch our summer game due to general confusion about this service. Let's not have a repeat of the Rugby World Cup, says Gorse. And this one too, I live in a rural area but only 5 minutes from a major town. Our broadband is so poor that we cannot get Spark Sport. Of course we can get Sky, but with the loss of rugby and now the cricket, we find ourselves left in the dark. All good if the services are there, but if they're not, and this sounds good but is being rolled out before the technology is capable of delivering, they sign off by saying, I'm not a happy man. Thanks for all your feedback. Do keep it coming. It's 6:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A major diplomatic row has broken out in the UK after a Downing Street source claimed a phone call between Boris Johnson and the German Chancellor had left hopes of a Brexit deal in tatters. Angela Merkel is said to have told Boris Johnson that an agreement was now overwhelmingly unlikely because the UK was unwilling to keep Northern Ireland in a customs union. The EU and opposition parties have reacted furiously, accusing Number 10 of playing a blame game and trying to undermine negotiations. The BBC's Norman Smith reports.
Although Downing Street has not quite declared the Brexit talks dead, it's hard to see how they can now be resurrected following a series of bruising briefings from Number 10, interventions which also appear to have significantly soured relations. In contrast to the normally rather bland readout following a telephone call with a foreign leader, Number 10 today let it be known that the phone call with the German Chancellor had not gone well. It was described as a challenging and frank conversation in which Mrs. Merkel's insistence on Northern Ireland remaining in the customs union made a deal impossible, not just for now, but forever. This followed a series of text messages sent, it's thought, from the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, to The Spectator magazine with a similarly stark message. In one, it was suggested the government could seek to disrupt the working of the EU if there was any attempt to delay Brexit. In the Commons, however, the no-deal Minister Michael Gove strongly defended the government's approach.
We've put forward a fair and reasonable compromise for all sides that respects the historic referendum result, and we hope that the EU will engage with us seriously. And in setting out these proposals, we've moved. it is now time for the EU to move to. If it does, then there is still every chance that we can leave with a new deal. However, if the EU does not move, this government is prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st.
Opposition politicians, however, have accused Downing Street of deliberately seeking to sabotage the talks in order to pave the way for a no-deal Brexit. The shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer.
The talks with the EU are collapsing as we speak. The proposals the government put forward last week were never going to work. And instead of reacting to challenge by adapting the proposals, the government is intent on collapsing the talks and engaging in a reckless blame game.
There was, though, support for the government's stance from the DUP, the party's Brexit spokesman Sammy Wilson.
I think it's quite clear that the EU never had any intention of accepting a compromise deal. They want a deal which keeps the United Kingdom tied to the EU through the single market and the customs union. And of course, as we've said many times before, that means that you're not really leaving the EU.
With time running out and a deal no longer likely, it appears the choice facing the UK is now between no deal and a further Brexit delay.
Norman Smith at Westminster. Poor facilities and under-resourcing at Palmerston North Hospital left a nurse in tears daily, ultimately leading to her resignation. Her claims are being backed by the nurses' organisation, who say the problems at Mid-Central District Health Board are pushing people to breaking point. This comes after 80 senior doctors wrote to the DHB complaining about what they describe as the inadequate state of the hospital and the harm it's causing patients. Charlotte Cook reports.
Nurses are backing the letter from the doctors saying the insufficient, outdated and poor operating theatres, emergency department and intensive care unit amounts to a crisis. They say they've lost faith in the DHB and its chief executive to fix the issues. A former Palmerston North Hospital nurse, who RNZ agreed not to name, says the situation is dire.
You might only have 5 or 6 patients, but they could be really high demand patients. You get given a list, the start of your shift, and you realise that you're at 30 hours over your 8-hour shift, and you don't have the hours in your shift to provide the level of care required.
The nurse resigned earlier this year, saying it was her only option. She dreaded going to work because of the stress, facilities and under-resourcing.
I would leave 90% of my shifts crying because you can't give the patient care that you've been trained to give and that you want to give. And it got to the point where I just actually couldn't go anymore.
The nurse says even if you wanted to complain, no one could help or listen. The nurses' organisation's Palmerston North spokesperson Wendy Blair says nurses are burnt out, fearful of reporting problems and end up quitting. She says even if the problems are reported, there is a lack of communication between the Mid-Central CEO and the board. She raised concerns about the emergency department in August and was ignored until she presented to the board personally.
The board had no idea of the extent of the issues at the hospital, and I believe that is probably the case with the rest of the issues that are being raised by the senior doctors.
Wendy Blair says the emergency department is already treating people in corridors and moving patients to the orthopaedic ward after hours to find more beds.
Nurses are barely coping with their workload and environment. It's difficult for nurses to work in an environment that's not suitable. Even 10 years ago, you walked through the hospital corridors and there was space. Now, if I walk through the hospital corridors, there's equipment lining the corridors, and that's because there's nowhere to store that equipment.
Mid-Central's population has a slightly higher proportion of older people than the national average, but Grey Power says their members awaiting surgery won't speak out for fear of being pushed further down the list. The chief executive of the Mid-Central DHB, Catherine Cook, says they're working as fast as they can to find solutions.
It's clear that they feel the things that they come to work every day to do, which is to deliver good quality patient care, is in some way being compromised. They have to work a lot harder to make sure that they can deliver that care because of the facilities.
Catherine Cook says interim solutions are underway, but a new hospital block is 10 years away. For Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
The wives of two of English football's most high-profile players have got into a spat online over allegations of leaks to a tabloid newspaper. In a post to her 1.3 million Twitter followers, Wayne Rooney's wife, Colleen, accused Rebecca Vardy, or somebody with access to Vardy's account, of informing the Sun newspaper about details of her private life. And these were used in stories written on Instagram. Rebecca Vardy is the wife of Leicester striker Jamie Vardy, who used to play for England's national team alongside Wayne Rooney. The BBC's Palab Ghosh has the details.
Colleen Rooney has said that for years she's been concerned that private stories about her were being passed to a tabloid newspaper. And so she laid a trap on her private Instagram feed for the person she believed might be the source. This morning on social media, she explained what she'd done. Over the past 5 months, I'd posted a series of false stories to see if they made their way into the Sun newspaper, and they did. She said that she also ensured that only one account could access those false stories, and that account belonged to Rebecca Vardy. Rebecca Vardy has denied passing on the information, posting an angry reply to Colleen Rooney, asking why she hadn't contacted her before going public. "I'm so upset that you've chosen to do this, especially when I'm heavily pregnant. I'm disgusted that I'm even having to deny this." Mrs. Vardy also said that, as with many celebrities, she's not the only person who's had access to her accounts over the years. She's now understood to be taking legal advice. Many have supported the way Colleen Rooney has tried to find out the source of the stories about her. Others, though, have questioned whether making accusations publicly in this way through Twitter is the fairest way to handle the issue.
That's Palab Ghosh there with that report. Pretty tricky move on Colleen Rooney's part. Hey, thank you so much for all your feedback this evening, especially about the cricket that you feel so passionately about. Don't forget you can go online, check out all our visual stories, or if you missed something, you can revisit it there. That's us for this evening. We'll see you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Coach Steve Hansen says calling off the All Blacks World Cup match against Italy this weekend is a no-brainer as Typhoon Hagibis bears down on Japan. Nikki Hager's lawyer says people need to be assured the SIS cannot obtain people's phone data illegally in future after the spy agency had to apologise for doing so. The chief censor does not yet know how many New Zealanders saw a video of last night's gun attacks in Germany before it was declared illegal. And the Dunedin flat, where a student suffered fatal injuries at a party last weekend, will be run as Otago University accommodation next year. And our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The whole community is owed answers as to why it did take so long to find Mason.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
Well, as quiet as we can possibly run the store, so there'll be no radio, no PA announcements, dim the lights. It's